Uh-oh.
No.
There she is. Okay.
Hello.
Oh, yay. Okay,
Switch
hi,
back.
everyone.
Switch back.
That was like suspense. Yeah, super suspense. Hi, everyone. Welcome to date night. This is date night number 6. And tonight we have another historical romance date night with 3 amazing historical romance authors. So, first, just to give the little overview. If you have any questions, there is an ask a question box at the bottom of the screen. It's at the bottom of my screen and hopefully your screen. You can put your questions in there and you can upvote and downvote question. Oh, I don't know if you can downvote. You can upvote questions. Don't downvote other people's questions if that's an option. You can upvote questions that you want answered and they will rise to the top. And later in the evening, I will go into that box and pull some questions out. And yes, that is Saga, and over there too. That one fell off the wall, which is why it's sitting there. But okay, so first I'm going to introduce our guests, who I'm assuming most of you know, but I'm going to do this for posterity. Beverly Jenkins is the recipient of the 2017 Romance Writers of America Nora Roberts Lifetime Achievement Award, as well as the 2016 Romantic Times Reviewer's Choice Award for Historical Romance. She has been nominated for the NAACP Image Award in Literature, was featured both in the documentary Love Between the Covers and on CBS Sunday Morning. Since the publication of Night Song in 1994, she has been leading the charge for multicultural romance and has been a constant darling of reviewers, fans, and her peers alike, garnering accolades for her work from the likes of the Wall Street Journal, People Magazine, and NPR. Yay, welcome, Beverly. Everyone,
Thanks
this is
for
where you,
having me. Yay.
everyone at home is happy.
Hello, everyone in the crowd. Glad you're here.
Courtney Milan's books have received starred reviews in Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Book List. She's a New York Times and a USA Today bestseller. Courtney lives in the Rocky Mountains with her husband, an exceptionally perfect dog, and an attack cat. Before she started writing historical romance, Courtney got a graduate degree in theoretical physical chemistry from UC Berkeley. After that, just to shake things up, she went to law school at the University of Michigan and graduated summa cum laude. I don't know how to pronounce that. Then she did a handful of clerkships with some really important people who are way too dignified to name here. I'm thinking Courtney is more dignified than them.
Wait a sec. I need to change that bio.
Yeah. Anyway, Courtney's awesome. Fuck those people. And welcome to Date Night. Olivia Waite writes historical romance, fantasy, science fiction, and essays. When the birds are propitious, she sends out the Olivieri, newsletter full of links, recommended books, and great pieces all over the great wide internet. And she also reviews for the Seattle Review of Books, and we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
And we will talk about where you can be found later. And her upcoming release is The Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows. Yeah, as I already warned them, my brain is on a bit of a lag today. So we're just going to get through it. It's been a bit of a week. We're going to get through it together. That is what date night is for. So first, thank you all for being here. And I'd like it if each of you could talk a little bit about your current ongoing historical romance series. So first we will start with Bev, your Women Who Dare. If you want to talk a little bit about Rebel and the upcoming
the Women Who Dare series is 3 books. That's only 3. You're not going to get 4. You're not going to get 5. It's called a trilogy. Places some people say, well, how many books are going to be in there? It's a trilogy. 3 books. The first book was Rebel, which took us back to one of my well-loved and, for some people, most loved historical family, the Levesques. This is one of the younger brothers, Drake. The second book, which I just finished, It's called Wild Rain. It will be out in February. And it is in the world of Tempest and Forbidden. This is Colton Lee's sister, Spring Rain. She's a rancher and a very, very badass young woman who breaks horses and all of that. So I'm looking forward to that coming out in February. And then there will be a book 3, which I will probably start sometime next year, but I have no idea who the third woman will be.
Hey, suspense.
Yeah. So that's me for that right now. Now, next.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
We will go this way on my screen. Courtney, can you talk a bit about the Word Saga?
Sure. So the Word Saga. This is funny. That's why I'm laughing. So the Word Saga is about a family whose father is convicted of treason, and they lose basically everything. And I started writing this because I wanted to explore the idea of sort of like what it meant to have things in Britain and whether people actually deserved to have nice things if you were British. And I haven't really gotten entirely to that part of the series yet, but we're getting there very swiftly. And in fact, the book that I'm working on in that saga right now is a book called The Devil Comes Courting, and it's set entirely in China. And it's probably one of the first places. I shouldn't say entirely in China because there are parts that are in Hong Kong, which at the time of the book is set is not part of China. It's a British colony protectorate. I don't know exactly. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's protectorate. But small parts of it are set in Hong Kong, but most of it is set in China. And so it's been an interesting book to write for a number of reasons. One being that I've never written a book set in China. And so it's taken a lot more research. And yeah. So
yeah. And I think that's going to be really good because there are not that many historical romances set in China. There are some. This is something that, we'll get to eventually.
Yeah.
But we will come back to that. Olivia, can you tell us a bit about your series?
Sure. My current series is the Feminine Pursuits series. And I like to think of it as less of a sequence and more of like something like a carousel. So you can hop on at any point of the 3 books and ride the whole thing around. Like it's more fun if you do all 3, but you don't have to do them in any particular order. And the second book is coming out at the end of this month on July 28th, and it's The Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows. And it's been just a ton of fun. I started writing this. It was just one book in my head, and it was just, I wanted to read a really sparkly FF romance. And then I remembered how much I liked astronomy, and then I remembered how much I liked embroidery, and I'd never seen a heroine who enjoyed embroidery, and all these things kind of folded together and became a 3-book series. And it's been just an absolute delight to work on.
That's awesome. And this is the first historical FF series from Avon, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, because Your Once Ghosted was their first sapphic romance in 20 years, 25 years?
Yeah.
Something like that.
I guess the first contemporary one.
First modern, yeah.
And we will talk a bit about that too, the queer historical romance in traditional and indie publishing, I guess. But so the Feminine Pursuits, I wanted to talk a little bit about we're going to talk a bit about more than usual about research today, given what everyone writes. But one thing I really loved about your series is you really go into detailed research, but also about all of your series. But Olivia, one of the things that I messaged you when I started reading The Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows, one of the heroines in the book is a beekeeper. And I was very excited because she was talking about skeps. And Mr. Cole is just enjoys doing random things. So he was collecting straw to make some skeps because he wants to make some houses for bees because he likes bees. So can you talk a little? So I was like, yeah, I actually know about bees. Awesome. But can you talk a little bit about the jobs that your heroines have in this book? Because both of them are interesting.
Yeah. So, this one, when I started the series, I started with the job before I knew anything else about the plot of these books. So it's very much like built into the nature of this series is the work that these women are doing in historical settings. And it's been so much fun to actually really dig into that in terms of the research and the history. And I'm always someone who's really kind of identified with the work that I do, both for fun and for like actual work. So in the Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows, they just sent me my copies and they're looking all kinds of pretty.
Cool.
You have an engraver. And so she's been doing engravings mostly, but now in this new kind of atmosphere, she's been trying to gain more sales by doing more political topics, but that comes with certain other risks. And she meets Penelope Flood, who is a beekeeper. She's been kind of following up on the scientific literature of the time because this is the year 1820, and it was a really interesting time for bees. You have this point, because you do have a lot of the skep hives and a lot of the old traditional honey and beekeeping methods, which are very just hugely ancient. Like they go all the way back well into prehistory, and we find images in cave walls of scratching where people are clearly harvesting honey from log hives where they've trapped some bees and this whole thing. But around the early 19th century is when you start to see the technology of it really take off. And so you have all these wacky hive designs, things that open with multiple frames that look like a book. And you have hexagonal hive things in glass and bronze and metal and wood. And a lot of it was similar to what people are doing today, which is trying to find better ways and more sustainable ways of keeping bees. Because the biggest problem with the skep in terms of honey harvesting is that you have to get the honey out by killing the bees.
Yeah.
Now, you don't ever want to actually take the honey from the bees. That's fine. And there's ways of modifying skeps, some of which appear in the book. You can cut off the top layer and put in glass jars. Yes.
Explain skep to me, please.
Oh, yes.
It's like a...
Yeah, it's your traditional
bee house.
That rounded hive that looks like it's made like a straw hat.
Right.
Yeah, it's a skep, and it basically is you coil straw up real tight, and the bees like it. They can keep it warm really well. They can stick to it so they can walk up. Glass hives can be tricky because the bees don't stick. They just slide.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
But
all right.
yeah,
I just wanted to know what you were talking about. Okay.
Now, I didn't know. I only knew what a skep was because Mr. Cole had been like, look at this thing I want to make, and sent me an article. He does not want to harvest the honey. He would leave the honey for the bees. So no bees will be hurt in the making.
Bees, the skep is pretty much the closest thing to what the bees would make for themselves naturally.
Okay. All right. Cool. Oh, you're welcome, everybody who also said that.
I get curious. But a lot of it is about because you needed to kill the bees. What eventually became the most popular bee design that we still use was invented in about, I want to say 1830, which was just too late. But it was a removable frame hive. And now you can pull out each individual honeycomb and harvest the honey and put it back in and not have to actually murder any bees to do this. And a lot of the conversations that beekeepers were having in the early 19th century are paralleling what you see modern beekeepers working with in terms of conservation and pollination and working with agriculture and working with local farms and kind of small scale production and organic and home style production, as opposed to later in the 19th century, you're going to get, and don't ask me about industrial beekeeping. I will be here for 30 minutes, ranting about
I truly didn't even think that was a thing. I thought they just made fake honey. But I did. So in your book, you do have, because one of the heroines runs a printing press, and, there's a lot of political intrigue going on. Mm-hmm. And so kind of freedom of the press and those kinds of things come into play And Bev, in your upcoming book, The Hero is a reporter at a Black newspaper. And so I wanted to know about your kind of research into Black newspapers of the time, or kind of anything fun that you discovered or want to share about that.
Most of them, okay, and I'm gonna be like Olivia, right? It's like, okay, let's go back, back and then the Wayback Machine with, Mr. What's his face, Mr. Peabody and Sherman. Before 1827, mostly white people spoke for Black folks in the press. There were no Black newspapers. First newspaper was Freedom's Journal, published in either 1827 or 1837, I can't remember, by John Russwurm, who was one of the first African Americans to get a degree in the United States, and a very militant preacher named Samuel Cornish. So throughout the 19th century, there were probably, between 1827 and maybe 1899, there were maybe 550 newspapers. Many of them were what they called sundown papers, in the sense that the editors did the work on them after their main jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So they worked on them after sundown. So they were sundown papers. But they were big, they were small, they were probably in all over the nation. And they spoke for the race, especially with the rise of Jim Crow. There's a great book called The Black Press by Martin Dan. I put that in the newest book, so people can probably try and find it in their libraries. I don't know if it's still in print or not, but he has actual editorials taken from a lot of these newspapers, and these people were not playing. They were calling out the government, they were calling out the president, they were calling out each other, because kinfolk sometimes ain't skinfolk. So so it's very interesting in the sense that there were so many of them, and some of them were so small. Some of them were very, very small. Some of them only lasted a month.
Yeah.
But you had T. Thomas Fortune out of New York with the New York Age, that was very, very widely distributed, and the Chicago Defender, which was, probably the nation's Black newspaper. It was so well read that the Pullman porters were very instrumental in taking it around the country on their routes and making sure folks got a chance to read it. So interesting. A few women. Marianne Shadd had the first woman, really, first Black woman, first woman to have a newspaper on the North American continent. She was living in Canada at the time, but she called herself Brother Shadd because she didn't think men would take her seriously. So of course she got busted, and they found out, and she had to own up to being a female. But she did some amazing editorials right after Reconstruction, and was also one of the women who got arrested for trying to vote with Sojourner Truth in Washington, D.C. during one of the early elections. So it's a great history. And he's a journalist. He's there really representing his father because he's a carpenter. He's got a lot of jobs. He's like a Headley. He's got a lot of jobs. But working with wood is his main love. But the newspaper part of it, I really, really enjoyed. And then Cheris Hodges, our resident journalist on Twitter, who did sports in Charlotte for a while, sent me her college textbook on the Black press. And that was also helpful in getting some of the history. So thank you, sis. That's one of the great things about romance. We help each other. So that's my little spiel on the newspapers. If you want to find more, shameless plug, buy my book.
Read the book.
And there's a bibliography in the back that has more info on the Black press. Okay,
I do want to add one brief thing that when I was researching for the thriller, I was looking at some of the historical Black Brooklyn newspapers, and they also, I mean, this was from like before slavery ended, and they also would have things like spelling section, grammar, like school stuff, basically, to like so in addition to editorials and all and things like that. Yeah.
For uplift, what they call uplift. And they had society sections and what the bougie
What was
folks
going
were
on in the
doing.
neighborhood?
Yeah, going on in the neighborhood. You know, who was the ambassador to Liberia, or who was the ambassador to Haiti, and all of that. So yeah, not just editorials. It was dealt with Black life in ways that hadn't been dealt with before 1827. So yeah. Okay.
So Courtney, I want to talk about a little about, I mean, this will be something that relates to all three of you, but in your last release, which was Mrs. Martin's Incomparable Adventure, the two protagonists were older women who were kind of relegated to the margins of society by virtue of their age, who had kind of become invisible, and who find each other and like, you know, start getting into mischief and fall in love in the process. So can you talk a little bit about writing that? Because again, that's another huge niche, I guess, that is missing in romance, which is older characters. I mean, even characters older than 20 something.
30,
like can be difficult to find. So and these characters were in their 60s and 70s, if I remember correctly.
I don't remember the exact ages myself.
Like 69
I think one was
and
like
76.
60. So I think I was going to say late 60s and early 70s. One of them's late 60s, one of them's early 70s. And you know, I think a lot of it came about because Mrs. Martin was a character in my full-length novel that came before that, and somebody said, you should write a novella for her. And I thought to myself, the first thought that came into my head was, you can't write a novella for a 70-year-old woman. And then I was like, why the fuck not? You know? And so like I had this thought, and I immediately looked at it and I was like, wait a second. Like there was a lot of really wonky stuff going on with that thought, right?
Yeah.
Like just the idea was like, we don't write romances for women above a certain age. And I was like, wait a second, I'm above the age that we don't write women, like we don't write romances for. And like, why am I thinking these thoughts about myself? And so I just sort of went through all of the things that I was thinking. And I was like, you know, this actually says a lot about, you know, how I feel about how aging works and all of this stuff. And it's actually really not good that women especially are telling themselves that they're not desirable after they reach a certain age, that they don't have interesting stories to tell, that, you know, it's like and especially with the way that romance sometimes tends to code how they talk about female bodies. It's always like young and fresh and smooth and like all these words that, you know, like, you know, describe a perky. Yes. You know, like, you know, it's like, you know, gravity hasn't started to work on you yet. And neither has sunlight and neither has age. And, you know, but why do, you know, it's one of those weird things that you start thinking about it. It's like men can go a lot older than women. And we know this is true, like in society in general. You have like these movie stars, and it's like, you do you know, you see those charts of like one of those guys, and here was the person he was starring against when he was 20 and she's 20. And here's the person he was starring against when she was 30 and she's 20. And here's the person he was starring against when he's 60 and she's 20. Right. And it's like, so men are acceptable at all ages, but women are not. You know, so like I just had to think about that, and I was like, well, if I'm having this thought, then there are probably a lot of other people that do too, and frankly, it's bullshit, right? We shouldn't be thinking about secondary characters who are older as like, oh, sorry, too bad, your time has passed. We are only interested in you. You're an only interesting person when you are like up to age 27, maybe. Right? That's just a terrible way to think about people. It's a terrible way to think about yourself. Most of our readers are not in the age group of the women that get written about in terms of romance. And so, yeah, I really just was like, yeah, like just whatever this says about me that, I don't know. I don't want it to say that, if that makes any sense.
And it is it's one of those things where it's like kind of something just becomes normal. And this is why we always need to be interrogating what we're reading and what we're writing, even when people say it's just romance. I mean, obviously I don't believe that and can go talk the rest of the time for that. But like, so after a certain point, you're reading all these younger characters, and then you start to, in a way, it becomes the text. Like, okay, when you write romance, then you must be writing someone who is only 25. And I think that's fine, because certain stories do call for characters who are that age, but also we can widen the spectrum of age in these stories. And it shouldn't be a big deal, but it is a big deal. And like, so I remember, Bev, in your Destiny series, one of the really cool things was that the mom has her romance arc going across the series. And Olivia, if you want to talk a little bit about in your upcoming release, the heroines are both in their 40s. One heroine is a widow. Okay, well, you can get into that. But so, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, these women are older, older than the average romance heroine, not older than, like, particularly me. But can you talk a bit about that, writing that?
Well, it's been really interesting for me because, I'm also trying to push past that 20s. I got bored of writing 20-year-olds. Like, I had 6 books before this series, and I'm like, okay, so we've done the 20-year-old aristocrat thing. What else do we have? And what I realized was that one of the reasons why we use like the 20s is we have this idea that that at the end of a romance, there's a new phase of life starting, and that kind of matches up with the whole marriage courtship plan. But there's so many different reasons for a new phase of life to begin, and I think so many of them are underexplored. So I've always liked widows in romance for that reason, because then it feels like, oh, well, the marriage thing is over, it's done with. What else is there? And maybe it's a second marriage, maybe it's something different. I'm always interested. Like, one of the reasons I like Mrs. Martin so much is because it's like, it does feel like they're starting something new together, even though it was like, a little terrifying what they're starting. But and so with Waspish Widows, it was very much about 2 women who are very much in the prime of life, and nobody's expecting them to do anything other than kind of keep going. And the challenge for them is they want something more out of this life. They want something more out of their community. And how do they engage with their community in a way that doesn't lose who they are as individuals and the experiences that they bring to this relationship, but also that they have to be adaptable enough to change and find something new. And it was actually like, this is probably the most complicated relationship I've tried to write. It's not like Lucy and Catherine are very much like it was a straightforward kind of dynamic. We'd seen this before in many times, like kind of the patron ward relationship a little bit. And this was 2 people who had to meet very much as equals and then slowly change in understandable ways. And it didn't feel like there was a template. And that was really exciting. I got to do a whole bunch of things, but it was also really frightening. And I'm still not sure that I kind of, stuck the landing, as it were. Although the end's the best part of the book, so there's that. But it very much is about never feeling like your life has to be finished just because you've done the expected narratives.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that is really fascinating to look at romance through that lens. And like, one thing that I've been thinking about, I mean, just like thinking about astrology, because sometimes I think about it in relation to romance, is like, if you think when, like, I read a thing in astrology that like called the Jupiter return, which happens generally between the ages of like 28 to 30 or something. And basically, astrologically, that's when like important big things or changes are supposed to happen in your life. And sometimes I think about like all of these romances where the heroine is like is like 22. But what
Mhm.
happens during the Jupiter? Like, okay, these are just the weird thoughts I have. But just thinking about like, as far as life changes, and like, I didn't get married until I was 30, and like, just kind of all of the different ways that love can happen, and how people are told like, oh, you have to get married at this age. If you're not married by this age, then something is wrong. Or and romance can be I think one of the drivers of change in pop culture and society, and can help people to not feel bad about something that there's no reason to feel bad about.
Right.
So I'm going to go back a little to some historical stuff with Miss Bev. So the other day, someone tweeted that they did a reread of all your books last year, and they wrote down all of the time periods that the books took place.
I was amazed.
Which was awesome. So you have 20 for historicals, 25 novels, I believe. I tried to count them. Hopefully didn't lose count, that take place, set across America, spanning the years from 1775 to 1895.
Right. Yeah.
And even before I saw that, I was talking to someone recently, and I was just like talking about you a lot. Sorry if it gets creepy, but I started to go on about like the importance of romance in like literature, and kind of how things get. I feel like historical romance is such a huge learning resource, and this, in addition to being, sexy and fun, and
right.
Because like, one of the things I started, it was like I took this vocabulary test years ago, and I like got all of the weird words that most people miss because they were things I had learned from reading historical romance.
Right.
But also, as far as American history, like, I was already thinking this, but then seeing that, like, I would say that you are the preeminent writer of American history.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. That is my opinion.
That's your opinion. All right, baby. We'll go with that. I'm not gonna.
If someone, I'm not gonna argue with someone if they have someone else in mind. Everyone has their thing, but just the number of books, the breadth of those books, the things that you cover in all of those books. I mean, like, sometimes when I'm traveling across America, like for events, like I'll show up somewhere and I'll be like, the only reason I know the history of this place is because of Miss Bev's books. And like, okay, do I have a point with this? Anyway, I just wanted to talk about this because I think I feel very
you have a point, which is that.
But I guess I wanted to talk about too. I did write some kind of question down. So, having written all of these books and continuing to write American history, set historicals, do you feel like, how do you feel that you're writing about America? Do you feel it has changed over the years? Do you feel it has changed you and your perception of the world in any way? And I guess I'm trying to find the right question, because like you're covering all of these time periods as America is changing and as more things are coming to light, and especially in a moment like right now where people are starting to rethink American history or what they have been taught, and especially if they haven't read your books about American history.
We've done all this before.
Yeah.
We went through this when we, one of the great, personally, for a whole nother thing, having been pretty active during the 60s and the 70s and school, I have been waiting for this generation. I have been waiting for somebody who was going to pick up the baton that my generation dropped to go buy Beamers and condos and all of that after we, reached a certain age. But I'm so proud of these kids. I don't know what to do because I have been waiting for this another generation with the fearlessness, the we don't give a shit attitude. Change this motherfucker. Um, and I was thinking the other day, when the kids took over the outside of Chicago in '68 at the Democratic Convention, and those cops got to wailing on those kids. Well, they were us. We were all, that age. I was 17 in '68. It was the first time white America had ever beat its own kids. And people were like, oh my God, what is going on here? So you had the big Chicago 8 trial, and they had Bobby Seale, shackled to a chair with tape over his mouth so that he couldn't speak, and Abby Hoffman and all of them doing performance theater inside the courtroom. And I mean, it was just crazy. But I don't know where I'm going with this, but it just made me think about that. But the history has not changed. When Reconstruction died in '68, it was sort of like what we're going through now after the Obama years.
Yeah.
You got the rise back then. You had the rise of the White Lily Leagues. You had the rise of the Klan. You had the rise of the white supremacists, what they call redemption, redeeming America from the Negroes who had taken our country from us. So this is not anything that's new for me. We had the Chinese Exclusion Act. Everybody gets a chance in the box with America. The natives got it. We got it. The Chinese got it. The Mexicans got it. The Irish got it. So from a historical standpoint, I don't want to say impressed. Okay? Because we've done this before, and it's all cyclical. We got our hearts broke when McGovern was not elected president. We got Nixon instead, so it's like, okay. But history is a moving, breathing thing. It touches all of us, whether you want to be touched by it or not. Even those idiots who don't vote. I mean, this is going to touch your kids. This is going to touch your parents. This is going to touch your grandparents. Get your ass out there and vote. Don't get me started on that. Because in places in Louisiana, during the death of Reconstruction, there are historical records that there were no Black men alive over the age of 14. Men were lined up going to the voting booth, and supremacists were shooting them on the way. They shoot the first guy, the guy in the back will go to the front, and they keep marching. So people who say, well, this is not our country. Yeah, it is. We've been doing this a long ass time. We've been doing this a long ass time. So the idea that I have the privilege, and it is a privilege, to write what I want to write without any pushback, without anybody telling me, no, Miss Bev, you cannot write about that. It's a good thing. Because I get to what I call edutainment, and I've used that before, entertainment and education. So you're learning while you're fanning from the love scenes. And when you close that book, you have learned a hell of a lot, I hope. When I first started, there were book clubs that were built around the Biblists. They were reading the Biblists as opposed to, they'd read the book and then they'd go get everything on the Biblists, and they'd have the book club meetings the next meeting about what was in the back. So I think that's one of the great things about historical romance, regardless of what we're writing about, is because it teaches. We are the best Jeopardy players.
Yeah.
You know, we know random
Olivia
shit that nobody
was
else in
on
the whole
Jeopardy, I
damn world
think.
knows about.
True.
We also know the serious stuff,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know, that we're passing on to our kids. One, and I'm gonna get off my soapbox. So just one more thing. One of my, I'm on my 4th generation of women now. Yeah, the old hens like me who are in their 70s, have their daughters who are in their 40s, their daughters who are in college are reading me, and then the young ones who are reading the 2 YAs. When you educate a woman, you educate a race. So these women, and for all of us who are doing historicals, we're educating the country in ways that some people may think, oh, it's just romance. But we're doing a job here. One of my ladies who's now grandmother was talking with some of the history with her grandson. And so these kids are going in and doing these Black history projects on stuff that they read in my books, that their mothers and their grandmothers are talking about in my books.
Yeah.
So this one little boy did a thing on, I think, the Black whalers, which I've only touched on maybe a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher was like, where did you get this? He said, from my grandmama's Miss Bev books. You know, so the teacher's like, oh. So the idea that they're passing this stuff along means that these kids will grow up with not just Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman. They're going to know about the Black and brown outlaws. They're going to know about the Black whalers. They're going to know about the Black men in Congress during, you know, the years after the Civil War. So let me get down, and I can't be here till Tuesday talking about this. So I'm going to just sit back here and be quiet now. So but it's important.
No, thank you.
We love your soapbox. Your soapbox
We
is
do.
beautiful.
What we do is important. What we do is important. I'm shutting up now.
Well, I mean, we can talk a little bit. We're probably going to go a little bit longer than an hour today. Hopefully, I'll try not to keep you too long. But one thing I did want to talk about, because there was a bit of a thing on Twitter today. I didn't catch all of it. I wasn't on Twitter that much, but there was something about a Jane Austen romance site that took down an article about someone wrote an article about, like, basically, hey, people of color existed during the Regency, and then they took it down because they said it was too political and all of this stuff. Not going to get into that, but it made me think, especially leading up to this event, that all of us here write historical romances that at some point, I would hope that, like, right now today they wouldn't be called this, but that some people have called historical fantasy, like in reviews and stuff, like, oh, this is great, like historical fantasy, because of, and this is kind of linked to what you were just talking about a little, but, or tangentially maybe, but kind of this idea of what history is told and how important it is that people read other things, because then they will, like, read stuff about Black people falling in love, Chinese people falling in love, queer people falling in love, and it's so unreal to them, given everything else they know, that they literally call it historical fantasy instead of historical romance. But at the same time, they will read a book about, like, you know, the old standby example, like a serving girl falling in love with a duke and getting married, and that's not called historical fantasy. So, I mean, mostly I'm just mad and want to talk shit about that. but
I like talking shit.
Yeah.
But also, I just kind of want to know, like, I do feel like things are changing in historical romance. Things are getting more inclusive, but I just kind of feel like right now, with everything going on, like, I guess I don't want to have, like, a state of the historical romance union, but, like, what are your thoughts about?
Yes. Can I say something that's semi-bitchy? But
Yes.
actually
Oh,
very
sorry.
related to this. Okay, so some people may know that I had a little bit of a minor disagreement with somebody about whether Chinese women were submissive at some point. And
I
so like,
don't think I heard about that, but
I know.
so
We don't know anything
in
about
any
that.
event, like this is one of those things where it's like, I had not done a huge amount of research into sort of like ancient China for a number of reasons at the time. And or even I don't think you call it ancient, like, historical China. I had done a little bit, and there were some things that I had looked into, but there was some stuff that I knew about, but hadn't really spent a huge amount of time looking into. And so like this idea that Chinese women were submissive, like I know where it comes from. There is some truth to like, Chinese society was not great for women, which is true of just about not every society, but many, like
almost.
English society was not great for women. American society was not great for women.
No.
Like it was, and there were some specific issues in Chinese society, specifically with like plural marriages and concubinage and selling women and stuff like that were particularly not great. But also like this idea, the thing that I was coming at it with is there was always anomalies, so to speak. And that was, like, I know that there must have been anomalies because I know the story of my grandmother and great grandmother, which is happens around, starts around 1883 or so for them. Right. So I know there were anomalies, and I just didn't, I was like, so you can't just make blanket statements. And that was sort of where I was at the time. And the thing that I have discovered since then in terms of research is not only were there anomalies, the anomalies were like massive, like between 1850 and 1864, China fought a massive civil war. And I mean, like 20 million people died, which is like on a scale that's like impossible to imagine. Like the US Civil War was what, like less than 1 million?
Right.
600,000, something like that. So 20 million people, they don't know exactly how many, but they estimate somewhere between 10 and 30 million people died in this civil war. And the people who were eventually defeated, maybe temporarily, depending on who's telling the story, was a group that was called, in English, the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. They weren't actually heavenly or great peace, but the founder of it had a number of beliefs, some of which sound kind of weird. Like he believed he was Jesus Christ's younger brother, which is something that people would be very surprised about in China in 1850. But no, he believed he was Jesus Christ's younger brother. But one of the other things that they believed was that women were equal to men. And they redistributed land, and women got as much land as men. And women were allowed to take imperial examinations in this in the state that they set up. And one of the women who took it got the highest grade. So like, this is not just like a minor blip or a minor anomaly. It is, an entire society that had this as an undercurrent. Also as an undercurrent is that the person who founded this was an ethnic minority in China. Whether they're actually ethnic or whether it's cultural is something that people debate in China for a number of reasons, but that's not really relevant. They're a cultural minority, which treated women very differently than standard. And my grandmother was a member of the same minority. And so when I hear, so it's one of those things that suddenly all these pieces start to come together in my head. The stories I heard about my grandmother start connecting with history. And I start seeing not, oh, she was an anomaly, but I understand where she came from. For the first time, I understand where she came from. And that means in a sense that I'm beginning to understand where I came from for the first time. So it's been really sort of an interesting journey to realize that it's not just, I come from a line of anomalies, but, I come from a line that believed in female strength.
Right.
And that is something that I think, will get labeled as historical fantasy by some people, and it's not. Okay. It's just not. Women have always been strong in every culture. Not all of them, because women are not always strong in our culture, and there's no one group that you could say, oh yes, they're all very strong, right? But we've always been here in large numbers, much larger than people ever want to give us credit for.
Yeah. Women have always pushed the envelope on gender and on race.
Yep.
Yes.
Gender and race. So
yes.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things
I know.
One of my favorite things that I discovered while doing like the research that I'm still doing for this series is how often you come across accounts of like priests in London saying, "Oh, I had this couple and asked to get married, but they were obviously both women, so I just, told them, no, you can't do that," and sent them on their way. And this happens like all the time. And so like the way we talk about queer relationships not existing in the past and the way we talk about like that kind of human aspect of desire and finding yourselves in this history, like locating that lineage in a way that's been hidden from you.
Yeah.
But if you go and look at the primary sources, it's right there, and everybody kind of knows about it or talks around it. And it's, I don't know, it's the question of what you can prove using documentation and what you know must have been happening because people are basically people in every era.
Yeah. And I think there's like this, no, you can go back.
No, I was going to say, it was like the article that I posted on Twitter the other day about the gay guys on the prison ship. It's like, it happened. It happened. It was even written down this time, So,
and I think a particular thing that is frustrating in historical romance when people, try to say, well, this didn't really happen, or historical fantasy, is that they use oppression as a reason for something not happening. So like, oh, this isn't true because that person was being oppressed during that time period. So obviously they couldn't be happy. Obviously they but it's such a lack of understanding of how humans work, because there are people being oppressed right now while we're talking. But
you're still falling in
the world
love.
is still going. People still fall in love. People are still sneaking away to go get it on somewhere. Romance is still happening. And so when you that's the thing that's so frustrating to me, and honestly about racism in general, is that it's so illogical, and people will just say the most ridiculous thing and think they have a point. And it's like, what do you mean? So you think because it just kind of erases the possibility of happiness just because oppression exists. But then at the same time, you know what
this
I
is
mean.
This is a logical fallacy. This is a logical fallacy, and it has a name. The name is the mind projection fallacy. And the idea is basically that behind it is you see something and you assume that your view is the reality, right? And so what happens then is you tend to conflate two things that look the same to you on the surface with each other. So you see someone being oppressed, and what you see is this person. You don't see this person as being oppressed. You see this person is submissive, right? That's what you see. You see them giving way. You see them not being able to do things. And so you think that your mental view of what's happening on the outside is what's happening on the inside. And in most cases, it is not true. Like if somebody's sitting there and not saying anything, you have no idea what's going on in their head, right?
Right.
You have no idea if they're plotting your downfall. You have no idea what they're planning to put in your food, none of this stuff, right? You just have no idea. But this idea is you see someone and on the surface you see meekness and saying, okay, sure. But inside it's like, okay, I'm running my video camera. This is going on Twitter as soon as I get home. Right. You just, you don't know. And so I think a lot of this is people have seen the external stuff and they've mapped an internal state on that. And they refuse to admit that there is a distinction between the two. And the reason they refuse to admit that very often is because admitting it is very uncomfortable. It's great if you could say, well, they were just happy and submissive. And it's not so great if it's they wanted to kill us all the time.
Yeah. Happy slave.
Exactly.
They were just yeah. And you go back and you read the slave stories and the histories and you find a woman who scraped off the back of a mirror, and I don't remember what substance it was, and she was mixing it in with the applesauce.
That would poison a lot. Yeah,
killed her mistress that way. I had nothing to do with it. She died of applesauce.
She died of applesauce is the.
You never know what's going on. Courtney's right. You never know what's going on in somebody's head. So, you can't assume that just because you think you're right.
Yeah.
People don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And Alyssa, I think that comes up really strongly in the third book of your Loyal League series. There's that whole library scene where it like the entire frame shifts. And it's one of my favorite moments in like probably all of romance. I literally dropped the book and started yelling. Like
thank you. Okay, so it's almost 7:00. Okay, so
we can be here till next Tuesday, everybody.
Conversation. I am going to ask some date night questions and some questions from the Ask a Question box. The first thing I will ask is, over the last few weeks and months, is there anything you have read or watched on Netflix that you really enjoyed, read and or watched on Netflix? So any books and TV shows or movies that have, brought you joy, comfort, entertained you, that you think other people would enjoy reading, that it would keep them preoccupied during this time. This is the point where I talk about Crash Landing on You, which is the running thing. Crash Landing on You. We have to say it every time. I hope that everyone who is here has watched it at this point, because I talk about like my mom has started texting me K-dramas to watch because I think she has like seen me talking about Crash Landing on You so much. But so if you have any, and I do have a new K-drama to recommend, but if you guys can go first, anything you've read or watched recently that, or not even within the last few weeks or months, but anything that you think would the date night dates would enjoy getting into.
Olivia, go first.
Well, I've got a couple of book recommendations. Most of my Netflix stuff these days is rewatches, because when in doubt, I default to something familiar. So things like Leverage and Scrub. I watch way too much Scrubs, like way too much. But two of the... One is a book that's not quite out yet, and it's called The Roommate by Rosie Danan, and it's a debut. And the hero is a porn star, and the heroine is this very uptight socialite, and they end up rooming together, because reasons. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the most wholesome things that I have read in so long. It's like the sweetest, nicest, warmest, sexiest book. And it was just like a warm bath for the heart kind of a thing, where they're making the world better, and there's a lot of romances out there with really fun characters and good stories, and you want to find out and you want to see people get happy. And this one, more than most, really felt like you could see at the start that they had potential to be better people, and then you got to watch them become better people, and it felt like you could feel that growth happening in a very real way. And it felt very healing to me. And the other one, which is similar, I guess, is Alexis Hall's new one, The Boyfriend Project. No, not Boyfriend Material. Boyfriend Project, Farrah Rochelle.
Oh, yes.
Farrah.
Yeah.
Like, wait, Farrah.
Like, Farrah shut up.
This is the mix-up that's going to be happening all summer, I think.
Boyfriends all the time, yes. But yes, let's add The Boyfriend Project as well, because honestly, that opening scene is like, that series is going to be magical. But Alexis Hall's Boyfriend Material is the fake dating hot mess meets buttoned up accountant type, and they need the fake relationship and end up falling in love.
Yeah.
But it's also like, it does a really good job of balancing how like the buttoned up guy isn't as on top of things as he pretends, and the hot mess is slowly getting himself together enough to kind of help out. And it was this beautiful, incredibly funny book, like just laugh out loud, classic British humor kind of funny. And those I haven't been reading as much this summer for reasons that I'm sure I don't need to explain. But, those two in particular, three, including Farrah Rochelle, and we're going to bring it back to Vanessa Riley again, because if you want murdery, that was a good one. That was nice and gothic. So there are my recs.
That's so funny. It's so funny because when you said The Roommate, that's on my list too, but not that one.
Oh, which one was yours?
This one was recommended by Lily in the middle of the night one day last week.
Is it Katrina Jackson?
No, it's Brandy Bush.
Oh,
That's Katrina Jackson.
Is it?
yeah.
That's one of her many names.
Yes.
I thought the book was gonna catch on fire in the last 10 pages. I was like, okay. Hot, hot, hot. No,
Okay.
torrid. The word is torrid, not hot. Torrid. So if you want a little novella that will melt your Kindle right out of the case, get The Roommate by Katrina Jackson, also known as Brandy Bush. What else am I reading?
Yes.
We talked about Janina's True Alpha by Shanisha Higgins.
Mm-hmm.
Awaken the Dragon by A.C. Arthur. If you're looking for,
I have that on my
Yeah.
list.
yeah, she's real good. A.C. writes black shapeshifters. These happen to be dragons. So
I like dragons.
I was unprepared the last time we did something like this, and Alyssa said, "What are you reading?" I'm like, So I wrote them down this time. So okay, I'm done now. Oh, and Real Midnight is on my list,
Yeah.
and I'm in the middle of Love Lettering by Kate Claiborne. Claiborne. Yeah. Courtney.
Okay, so my Netflix K-drama recommendation, and I had to open this up because I couldn't remember the name of it, is My Shy Boss. And there's some parts of it that I don't love, but the basic premise is there's a guy and he sort of inherited his company from his dad, who's kind of a piece of work. But his dad is like one of those like outspoken, gregarious guys, and he is like painfully shy. Like he can't talk to people, right?
Yeah. Okay.
I will content warning for suicide, because one of the sort of setup premises is that she's there to get revenge on the company because her sister committed suicide there. So that's kind of like one of the things that's there. So if you don't want to see that, you should be wary. But it's really very cute in many ways and very heartwarming, and like, yeah. So that's my Netflix recommendation. In terms of what I'm reading, the last book I read, and I haven't been reading as much this summer as for whatever reason, but it was Harbor. It was Harbor by Rebecca Weatherspoon. And I don't know if you have read her books. One of the things I love about her books is she takes these really screwed up situations, like they're just so messed up, and she makes them happen to these really good people. And so it's just like these really good people who are navigating this mess. You get all of the angst without being like, I hate that guy, right?
Yeah.
All the people you hate, you just get to hate them. You don't have to forgive them. You don't have to like. I mean, sometimes a little bit. So like sometimes you get to know like a little bit more about it. But like the premise of this is that this girl discovers that her fiance was killed, and he was killed with the woman that he was cheating on. And the woman that he was cheating on was in a relationship with these two other guys, and so she ends up meeting these two other guys because they have this thing where they all discover they're being cheated on together, and then it sort of goes from there, because it turns out that they were cheating on each other because they had a type, and they still have a type, and yeah. So, but it's like this it's this really, it's a situation where it's like, you just really feel the like the double whammy of sort of like grief because your fiance just died, and that's a lot, but also like, and he was cheating on me and I didn't know, and I was going to marry him and nobody was telling me, and like all this stuff, right? It's just this, so it's this emotional weight that just gets lifted. It's like the perfect pandemic book, because you don't have to like hold on to any of that stuff for long. It's all about just like learning to let go. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, Harbor is also the book that I most recently read, apart from Olivia's book, which, both are great and I recommend them. But yeah, Harbor and Zenny too, they both have that kind of energy of like grief, but comedy.
Yes.
And then sexiness.
Yes.
I feel like it's very specifically Rebecca Weatherspoon.
Yeah, it
like
is.
You can. I don't feel like anyone else is
great.
writing characters like that.
Yeah.
So good.
And it's like this like thing. Like 1 second you're crying, and the next like you're laughing, and like
yes.
There's a very specific
And they're just good
particular
people.
way she writes. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
And that kind of like lifts you up even as you're feeling grief, and you kind of, and what, like as you said, for a pandemic, it's kind of good because you get to dive down into that grief, but also then pop up and to use some like harbor plays on words, like buoy yourself up with some sexy times and comedy. So yeah, I also I have, apart from reading for this and like being on deadline, I have not read that many books. I do have a big TBR pile that I will talk about. But first, I'm going to recommend the new K-drama that I watched this past week that also had that kind of similar, like each episode I was like crying and laughing. It's called Mystic Pop-Up Bar. I think it's new. And it's on Netflix, and it's basically this woman who in ancient times in Korea, like she was someone who could communicate with people and things in dreams. And so she was brought in to see, she was a shaman's daughter. She was brought in to see the crown prince, who was having these dreams that were like making him sick. And so then they fell in love, and then bad things happened. And so she kind of like placed a curse on this town. And so then after she goes to hell, she's given the opportunity to make up for it, she has to make up for like a huge sin that she committed. By redeeming the grudges of like thousands of people. So then it's like 500 years later, and it's like the modern day, and she has this mystic pop-up bar with like the guy. And so death is also kind of like hell is kind of like a corporation. And they're like, okay, you're not hitting your quota, and you got to hit it by this time, or you're gonna go to hell for real. And so she has her assistant. Then she meets this young guy who, so her and the assistant are probably like in their 40s and human years. And then there's this young guy who like, anytime he touches someone, they start telling him all of their problems. Like, so he works in customer service, so it's a problem like at a supermarket. So like someone will hand them their card, and then they'll be like, oh my God, like, my mom did this thing, and he's like, okay, so so he's kind of like, it's like a curse, but it's like, so there are all of these like twists and turns in this story, and it's like very sweet at times, and also funny, but also sad, but also because they're like solving these people's grudges, so that people can move on. And also, the first episode was extremely cathartic to me because one of the things is like one of the character, he works at a supermarket, and one of his coworkers is being like harassed. So that's also a content warning, being harassed by one of the guys who works there. And it was just like the first time I feel like I've really seen in a TV show people being like, hey, this is fucking wrong, and we're gonna like get some vengeance for you. And I was like, oh, this is amazing.
Nice.
So even if you just watch the first episode, it's very satisfying. But so Mystic Pop-Up Bar, I believe it's called. And like it has some parts that I didn't particularly love and that were not great, but overall it's a good show. My to be read pile is Cinderella is Dead. I'm not going to list everything, but Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Baton, which came out this week, which is a YA queer retelling of Cinderella with a Black heroine. And I am going to check that out. Okay, I didn't even get to the question box yet. Oh my God, it's like 7:13. Okay, are there historical moments that you have not written that you would like to write? From Felicia. And so, Olivia, starting with you.
Oh, well, historical moments. I want to do the 1920s. I want to do the Cold War. I want to do something Victorian, hopefully with hen fever. Alyssa, I've talked to you about this before. there was a big craze for fancy chicken breeds at one point in the Victorian era. Like, and people just went absolutely like bananas over this. I found this stock photo of a woman in very elegant historical dress and an amazing hat with a chicken under her arm, and I'm like, that's my book cover. This is a big thing, but I have so much reading to do.
Yeah. I want to do the Gentleman Gangsters.
Ooh. Yes.
What's that? The 30s and the 40s, the 50s, and they also had the Gentleman Gangsters in Detroit too. So I want to get to that, since we can now do historicals, now do 20th century. As you know, they used to stop at 1900. You know, you couldn't do a historical after 1900. So now that the 20th century has passed, we can mine some of that good stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do 1910 San Francisco for a number of reasons. The other thing I want to do, but will probably never do, I really want to write about the dinosaur war eras and
yeah, you have to do this.
Yeah.
Mid 1800s. Well, look, here's the thing. It's like a really screwed up situation. So for those of you who don't know, there were basically two professors who were fighting each other over who would discover the most dinosaur species,
right,
in the Southwest of the United States. And like, seriously, they would like send people to like sabotage the other person's digs. It was really bad. But also dinosaur wars. Does it not sound so good? Don't you just immediately want to write about that? That's how I feel as soon as I hear the word like dinosaur wars. But on the other hand, it's like, I'm not sure that like the actual story that I would write is going to be consistent with what I want to write. I don't know. Maybe it needs to be a play on it. I don't know that, but still, just like my heart. Dinosaurs.
I hope you figure that out. At the very least, we need like a Dinosaur Wars short story or novella. If you're not
like, I feel like there's something about that just speaks to my inner rar.
So, for anyone who doesn't know, the dinosaur emojis that you use on your phone are due to Courtney. She submitted.
Literally, I will never be prouder of anything in my entire life.
Submitted those to the like emoji council or whatever it is called.
Unicode Technical Committee. It's called the Unicode Technical Committee.
The Unicode Technical Committee, and that is why she is the mother of dinosaurs.
yes,
Emoji dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Period. I have a lot of periods I want to write in, but one that I'll talk about is I saw this series of pictures from this town that I think it was in like Kansas, and it was in the 20th century, early 20th century, and it was apparently there was a photographer there who was taking pictures of everyone in the town. And so there were the black, and I believe there was a military base nearby. So there were the black families, white people, Filipino people. It was just like this very diverse town.
wow.
And I saw these two pictures, one of this black woman holding her dog, and one of, I would say racially ambiguous, probably black guy holding his dog. And then I just was like, wouldn't it be like a meet cute of them and their dogs at this photography studio in this small town? So something kind of like, I thought it would be fun to write short stories or novellas like in this town with this photographer and all of the people in the town. So I don't know the time. It was like 1930s maybe. I'm not sure of the time period. I remember posting the pictures at some point, but like just kind of like enemies because of their dogs to lovers historical romance.
I love it.
Okay. We kind of talked about research already. Okay, a lot of these questions are things that we have kind of covered already in what we're talking about. But one question is, that can be, I guess, interrelated. Suggestions for beginning romance writers plus self-publishing versus traditional publishing. So suggested ways for beginning romance writers to start their practice. Bev, you answered this question in a previous video that we did together, the Juneteenth panel, where your first rule was finish the book.
Right.
So that is the number one thing. And I mean, like, I would just add, like, if you don't have any experience with writing and you want to, you can take a writing class. It's not necessary. You can buy some craft books, like writing romance. But I honestly, I believe the best education for a romance writer is to read romance. Read until you feel those beats engraved in your bones.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you have that, you can do whatever you want with them.
Yeah.
But
you can't write it if you don't read it.
You can't write it if
Yeah.
you don't feel it either.
Right.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
And I think like that's probably the biggest mistake of beginning romance writers is that they don't read other romances. So sometimes it's from a level of like ego, like, okay, I'm going to come in and write romance. I know all of you guys are writing trash. I'm here to write some good stuff.
And you're making lots of money.
Yeah.
You're making lots of money. No, we're not.
Sometimes it's just like people don't think of it. But like, seriously, you have to read. I feel like I won't say more so than other genres, but in a way, yes, because you really need to know your conventions. You need to know what readers' expectations, because basically romance readership is all about expectation, and subverting those expectations. And that's why every book is different. That's why there is no formula, but there is expectation, and you need to know what the expectations are so you can either meet them or say, guess what, I'm going to do something totally different, but make it within those expectations or within in a way that will not upset those expectations. Subversion, not being like, okay, the main thing you cannot do to subvert expectations is kill the people, kill the people at the end of the book.
Not happening.
Or have them not be together at the end of the book.
Yeah.
Really, that's the basic rule of romance. Finish the book, and when you finish the book, make sure the couple is together. Everything else will come together as you do revisions.
Right.
Trad versus indie publishing, that's like we can do a whole panel on that.
Yeah.
But,
that's a lot.
it depends on what you want to do.
Yeah.
Honestly, like, but if you do indie publishing, it is taking on all of the work of a publisher onto yourself. So it's not like some easy shortcut. I do think indie publishing is great. And I do indie publishing as well, in addition to trad publishing. It's great because you can, obviously you don't have to wait for someone to say, yeah, cool, you can write that. And you can get different kinds of things out there. There's so many amazing indie books out right now, particularly. But both of them have their pros and their cons, and you as an individual writer have to decide what works for you by doing research.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
I think both indie and traditional publishing have different forms of work that you have to do in order to accomplish them.
Right.
And I'm not entirely sure that one burden is larger than the other, because it depends on which burden you are better at carrying. So I think my general rule of thumb is that if you are more stressed out by responsibility than you are by lack of control, then that's kind of a good dividing line. Like, if you're the kind of person where it's like, I don't have any control over any of this, and it's not quite perfect, and I hate it all, then there's some aspects of indie publishing that you will find easier to bear. Whereas if you're the kind of person who's like, I have all these things to do, and I don't want to do any of them, then you're probably going to find self-publishing to be very stressful. And so I think not everyone has the choice about what they can make, but to the extent that you do, I think that is a thing to consider, like, about yourself. What is going to stress you out the most, and what are you willing what because different people, I mean, like different people find different parts very, very stressful. It also depends on your relationship with your publisher too, because you know, there are some publishers where you can go to them and say, you know, this cover really isn't working, and I think we should do X, Y, and Z. And they'll say, you know what, you've got some great points. I'm going to take those into account. And if you have that kind of relationship, it's a lot less stressful than the publisher saying, yeah, you know what, we listened to what you said, and basically we don't care. And this is the cover you got. And you're like, okay, but have you considered making her look like she does in the book? And they're like, no. We talked to marketing. They say this is the cover. This is the best cover for you. And you're like, really?
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, and so I think there's also like gradations of stress level based on who you're working with too.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it really varies from situation to situation, and from person to person, from writer to writer.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say. I feel like that's why I do both, because I feel like sometimes for certain projects it works better for a different kind of project. Other time. So yeah, I don't think there's like any hard and fast rule of what is better or worse, and I will retract that more work or less work, because it's all work. Okay. I think that's the other thing, and this is something that Rebecca brought up in our previous chat, which is to keep in mind that this is work, so it's gonna suck sometimes. That doesn't necessarily mean that the book is bad or anything like that, but it is, you know, hard work like anything else, any other career. So sometimes it's just, you're gonna have to just get through it. It doesn't.
Suck it up, Buttercup. Suck it up. Yep.
All right. So we have, it's almost 7:30. Before we go, I will ask you, what is your secret nerdy or fandom hobby that you're into, if you are willing to share it? Mine is currently looking at pictures of Captain Ree from Crash Landing on You on Instagram. So I don't know if that's a fandom or just being like, my Instagram Discover panel reveals all of my secrets. So that's my fandom. But Courtney, I see you have
This is Winnie the Pooh wearing a costume that Yuzuru Hanyu wore, which I handmade.
Courtney's into ice skating, for people who don't know.
Yes, I'm into ice skating. Yuzuru Hanyu is the greatest figure skater of all time. Some people may think that's an opinion. I think it's a fact. It tells you where I am in the fandom of Yuzuru Hanyu. I was going to throw this for him because people throw Winnie the Pooh on the ice for him. Winnie the Pooh he has a Winnie the Pooh tissue box that he brings with him to every competition and has since he was like a tiny like baby novice. And he like pets his Winnie the Pooh in the Kiss and Cry and says things like "good boy," which is really, really cute. And so people throw him Winnie the Poohs after he performs. And I was gonna throw this for him at Worlds, but then World Figure Skating got canceled this year because of coronavirus. So now Winnie the Pooh lives with me for now. And you get to see the origin costume.
The amazing detail.
Yeah, that is incredible.
So there's like
roses.
butterflies, and there's flowers, and there's little petals and little various and sundry things. Yeah. So.
And isn't it layered? I remember seeing a post of you.
Oh no, that's a different
the prototypes. Okay.
The prototypes for the other one. Like honestly, so hard. In part because Pooh is rounder than Yuzuru, and so like trying to make it flow right on Pooh versus Yuzuru was not easy. I'm gonna stop right there. We don't need to know any more about the depths of the nerdiness. Yes. We've done. There's my nerdiness, Olivia.
Well, I've got a couple of things. The one is bees. I'm I've always been kind of semi-obsessed with bees. My great-grandparents kept them. And so I've kind of always been like, ooh, bees, what can I pick up here and there? But like, I was trying to ask Mr. Waite if maybe, could we like keep bees in the apartment somehow? And he's like, no, that's not.
I just imagine him like
the fancy Pinterest, like, you know, hexagons on the wall, tubes go out the window, and he's like, we're not doing this. So instead we're planting like bee-friendly plants in the garden, and I am reading way too much on 2 words, bee crime. It's amazing.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Smuggled queens. Oh,
yes.
Like,
oh my gosh.
it's always magical. And like people
I feel like I just heard something
from California orchards. And
yes.
it's incredible stuff. It's all heists and it's
Wait.
drama.
Weren't you the person who was telling me about reptile crime too?
That was Rose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, no, she told me about that book, and I've been like saving it. Because
That's cool,
reptile crime, feather crime is really interesting. Yeah.
I feel like the bee fandom is. I love that you are in the bee fandom. I guess I am on the outskirts of the bee fandom here. But I love that, and I'm going to be searching bee crime. Miss Bev, do you have any?
I can do a little bit of everything. I'm into the bees too. I got the pollinators in my yard. I can't figure out why my bees no longer like the red bee balm.
Huh.
They prefer the purple. I got this big stand of red, and they're like, "Nope, we're not doing that." But the hummingbird likes the red. But you were talking about putting your bees in the apartment. I don't know what I don't know where I was, but it was a library. They had a beehive inside the library.
Yes. I've seen
And
that
you
online.
could watch it through the glass.
Yeah.
And they had a way for the bees to get in and out outside. So maybe you should just does that for your husband. It has been done before. This is not something new. But I'm a science girl, science, planets, bees. I don't know. If it's interesting, it's on my. Follow me on Twitter. You know what I'm a fan of on Twitter. Everything.
Okay, so we unfortunately have to wrap it up now. I don't really want to, but we have to. But thank you so much. I had so much fun tonight. Much needed fun. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Again, these are being recorded. Eventually they will all be put up. So if any of your friends haven't seen it, eventually they will be put up there, and this one will be great to get some of these historical details and research that you all were talking about. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great seeing you, ladies.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.